Isaiah's vision, the judgment of the nations and the restoration of the world. Imagine a completely transformed world. Chaos gives way to order, desolation becomes exuberance, and justice finally reigns supreme. But wait, how can this happen in the midst of so much suffering, so much inequality? Isaiah, the prophet of the divine vision, delivers to us a message that is both unsettling and deeply hopeful. The judgment of the nations and the renewal of the world go hand in hand. Yes, a scenario of destruction can be the prelude to unimaginable glory. Now stop for a moment and think. What would you do if you knew that all suffering has a higher purpose? And more, that there is a perfect plan already in action to bring renewal to what seems irreversible. Isaiah invites us to see beyond the obvious. The desert will flourish, justice will triumph, and those who feel weary will find eternal rest. But beware, this is not a common call. It's a promise with profound rewards. You will discover what it means to walk in the holy way, to live in true safety, and to witness the glory of God shine forth in a redeemed world. However, this also requires a choice of your own. Are you ready to face the challenge of letting go of false securities and embracing a higher purpose? Make no mistake, judgment comes, but it is not the end. In fact, it's just the beginning of something much bigger. Want to understand how all of this connects and what it means for you? So, come with me on this journey, prepare to be confronted, inspired, and transformed. The King's righteous reign, Isaiah 32:1-8. Imagine a world where justice reigns absolute, and judgment is not just a distant promise, but a palpable reality. Thus begins Isaiah's vision of a king who will rule righteously, bringing renewal to the nations. It is not difficult to connect with this yearning, after all. Who has never wanted a truly just leader, who acts wisely and protects the weak? This king will not only be a political ruler, it will be a shelter, like a shadow in the midst of the scorching desert heat, offering safety and rest. And more, by your side will be princes who share this spirit of righteousness, leading with integrity and inspiring transformation. Isaiah presents us with a scene where blind eyes will be opened and deaf ears will become attentive. This description goes beyond a physical miracle. It is a powerful metaphor for spiritual and moral awakening. Think of the difference that occurs when truth illuminates the darkness. It's like stepping out of a long, gloomy tunnel into the radiant light of day. In our everyday lives, this can be compared to times when we see clearly what is right, even in the midst of confusion. Have you ever experienced a situation where all seemed lost, but the truth came out and transformed the scenario? That is what this reign promises. The society described by Isaiah will be a place where the fool will not be exalted and the fraudulent will have no room to deceive. This view contrasts with the reality of many times and places where the lack of justice seems to prevail. Imagine an environment where worthy people, moved by the spirit of justice and glory, are recognized and rewarded for their actions. This invites us to reflect. How can we cultivate these qualities in our own sphere of influence? Maybe it's being that colleague who doesn't tolerate injustice at work, or the neighbor who defends the most vulnerable. But who is this righteous king? Isaiah does not name him directly, but the context points to a messianic figure, a divine ruler whose kingdom is not limited to human power. It is like imagining a leader who is not contaminated by the passions and selfish interests that we so often see in earthly leaders. This is the leadership model that transforms not only politics, but people's hearts. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to live under the leadership of someone like that, who puts justice and restoration above all else? Isaiah also highlights the impact of this leadership on the nations: stability, protection, and prosperity. Just as a good father or mother provides security for his or her children, this king will bring a sense of belonging and care to the people. In times of global instability, this promise is like water in the desert. In practice, we can draw inspiration from this by being leaders in our own families or communities, reflecting that justice and compassion in our daily decisions. What about princes? These secondary leaders committed to righteousness play a crucial role. They are like echoes of the king's righteousness, spreading renewal and guiding others along the right path. Think about how this applies to you. You don't have to be a ruler to influence in a positive way. You can be that friend who brings wise counsel, or the colleague who helps resolve conflicts fairly. Small acts of justice create waves of transformation. Isaiah reminds us that under this reign, even storms have a purpose, to show the value of a safe shelter. When we think of storms in life, financial, health, or relational problems, it is comforting to know that there is greater protection. On a day-to-day basis, this can manifest as a friend who listens to you when you need it most, or advice that helps you make the right decision. The question is, how can you be that shelter for others? An interesting detail is how Isaiah uses vivid imagery to describe this reign: shade in the heat, shelter from storms, renewal in the wilderness. These metaphors make the promise tangible, almost as if we can feel it. Try visualizing this in your own life. Imagine facing a difficult day, but finding a refreshing shade that gives you the strength to keep going. It is this feeling that Isaiah wants to convey. However, this vision is not just a call to comfort. It is also a responsibility. The king's righteous reign demands a response from those who follow him. It's like being part of an orchestra, where everyone needs to play their part so that the harmony is perfect. Are we willing to act justly in our choices, even when it costs us something? Think about how this can be reflected in your daily actions, whether it's treating someone with respect or standing up for what's right, even in challenging situations. Isaiah leads us to a glimpse of something greater, a world transformed by the righteousness and glory of the King. This vision sets the stage for the next challenge, a direct warning to those who live carefreely as if nothing can shake them. After all, are we ready to let go of overconfidence in ourselves and depend completely on something greater? This is the point where Isaiah's text becomes even more challenging. Warnings to confident women. Isaiah 32, 9-15. Isaiah begins this section with an urgent call to women who lived confident in their tranquility. Arise, women who are so confident. Listen to what I say, women who feel safe. Isaiah 32, 9. This exhortation resonates as a universal warning, not limited to just gender, but to those who rest in false securities. It's like depending on a dam that looks robust, but is about to give way. The prophet does not speak with condemnation, but with a sense of paternal urgency, asking them to reconsider their priorities before the harvests cease and the desert takes over the land. This warning is profoundly visual. Isaiah mentions that, in a little more than a year, you who feel secure will tremble, the harvest will be ended, and there will be no harvest. Isaiah 32:10. It is a warning that refers directly to the fragilities of material wealth and self-sufficiency. Imagine a fertile field transformed into a thorn bush. What seemed eternal and abundant vanishes in a matter of time. Likewise, in our lives, moments of plenty can disappear if we don't build a solid foundation in God's Spirit and righteousness. The prophet goes on to describe a scene of desolation. Brambles and rose bushes shall take the place of my vineyard. Isaiah 32:13. This transformation is not only physical, but symbolic. The abandonment of fertile lands reflects the state of a heart that turns away from renewal and righteousness. Here Isaiah points to an undeniable truth. When the spirit of righteousness and glory is neglected, both the earth and the human heart fall into ruin. What areas of our lives resemble abandoned vineyards in need of care and restoration? Isaiah also calls for humility, asking these women to put on sackcloth and mourn for the wastelands. Isaiah 32:11-12. This act of putting on sackcloth is an expression of sincere repentance, a common practice in Scripture to show submission and seeking spiritual restoration. Today, this can be translated into a time of honest self-evaluation, recognizing where we place our trust and seeking to realign it with divine justice. It is not a matter of self-punishment, but of genuine surrender. Isaiah's warning is a powerful reminder that no human plan, no matter how well crafted, can replace dependence on God. Till the Spirit be poured out upon us from on high, and the wilderness be turned into an orchard, and the orchard be counted a grove. Isaiah 32:15. This promise is an anchor of hope in the midst of desolation. No matter how barren the terrain may seem, the outpouring of the Spirit has the power to renew everything. Have you ever experienced times when, in the midst of difficulty, divine intervention brought about complete transformation? The Spirit of God acts like a rain that revitalizes even the driest places. Just as wasteland turns into an orchard, our lives can be restored when we seek His presence. Isaiah challenges us to trade confidence in our own strength for complete dependence on the Lord. It is from this point that true renewal arises, not one based on empty promises, but on deep and lasting change. Isaiah's vision points to a universal truth. Self-sufficiency is a mirage. Imagine yourself in the desert, seeing a shadow that seems close, but as you get closer you realize that it is nothing more than an illusion. This is the risk of relying solely on our skills or resources. Isaiah not only warns, but also offers a solution, a return to trust in the King who acts with justice and restoration. Isaiah makes it clear that the changes he announces are not only a threat, but also an opportunity. The wastelands will not remain like this forever. The Spirit will bring life, renewing not only the earth, but also the nations. And this transformation will be a visible work of divine glory. Righteousness shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness shall live in the orchard. Isaiah 32:16. This invites us to be participants in this justice, seeking balance and righteousness in our own lives. The prophet does not speak only to the generation of his time, but to all who have ears to hear. He exhorts us to reflect, where are we placing our trust? Are we living like confident, carefree women, or are we attentive to the needs of the moment? Perhaps Isaiah's call is an invitation to reconsider, not with fear, but with the hope that there is a better way. In the end, Isaiah's warnings are like an alarm. They are not meant to paralyze, but to awaken. And by opening up this space for reflection, the text naturally leads us to the next stage, the promise of renewal that the outpouring of the Spirit will bring, turning the desert into an orchard and inviting us to live in full justice. Promise of renewal and righteousness, Isaiah 32:16-20. Isaiah presents us with a vision of hope that comes as a relief from the weight of previous warnings. Righteousness shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness shall live in the orchard. Isaiah 32:16. These words not only describe a scenario of transformation, but also show us the direct action of the Spirit of God. What was barren and fruitless will be renewed, and this renewal is not superficial. It is a change of essence, where justice and judgment become the basis for a new beginning. Think about how this concept might apply to your own life. What areas of your journey are in need of this restoration? The renewal that Isaiah describes does not happen by chance. It comes after the outpouring of the Spirit, a divine act that restructures chaos and gives life to what was dead. Till the Spirit be poured out upon us from on high. Isaiah 32:15. This is a reminder that true transformation starts within. In our lives, moments of renewal may seem far away, but when we seek God's presence, the impossible becomes reality. Have you ever experienced a time when you felt like you were in the middle of an emotional or spiritual wasteland, but something, an answered prayer or unexpected advice, brought new life? Isaiah paints a vibrant picture of renewal. The wilderness shall be turned into an orchard, and the orchard shall be reckoned a grove. Isaiah 32:15. This description illustrates not just an external change, but exponential growth. It's like starting with something small and watching it blossom beyond your expectations. In practice, it can be like a project in your life that starts with hesitation, but with dedication and faith, it grows and prospers. This promise challenges us to see the potential hidden in situations that seem lifeless. More than a physical transformation, Isaiah speaks of peace and security as fruits of justice. The effect of righteousness shall be peace, and the fruit of righteousness shall be rest and security forever. Isaiah 32:17. This teaches us that true peace does not come from external circumstances, but from alignment with God's will. Imagine living in a state where your soul finds rest, even in the midst of life's storms. This is what Isaiah promises, a peace that transcends human understanding. This rest is not just a temporary relief. It is a permanent state. Isaiah describes a scenario in which my people will live in peaceful dwellings, in safe dwellings, in quiet places of rest. Isaiah 32:18. In a world where uncertainty seems to be the norm, these words sound like a firm anchor. Think about how to apply this to your life. What can you do to create an environment of peace, whether it's in your home, work, or relationships? The promise of renewal does not ignore the challenges. Isaiah mentions that there will be times of struggle. Though the forest shall be destroyed and the city shall be razed to the ground. Isaiah 32:19. Yet even in the midst of destruction, restoration remains the final word. This view teaches us that God does not ignore our pains, but uses them as part of a larger process of transformation. How many times have difficulties in your life paved the way for something new and better? The mention of the wilderness and the orchard also points to a spiritual upheaval. The desert, often a symbol of trial and scarcity, becomes a place of fruitfulness. This inversion is a powerful reminder that God transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Think of situations that seemed hopeless but became opportunities for growth or learning. That's how God works, turning the wilderness into glory. Isaiah concludes this passage with an image of abundance and blessing. Blessed are you who sow by all the waters and leave oxen and donkeys free. Isaiah 32:20. This symbolizes generosity and freedom in the midst of prosperity. The idea of sowing by the waters encourages us to be intentional in our actions, trusting that God's provision will never fail. In our practical life, this may mean investing in others, volunteering our time and resources, knowing that God will bless those efforts. This promise of renewal reminds us that while judgment is inevitable, it is not the final chapter. God always plans a future filled with glory and righteousness. When Isaiah talks about rest and peace, he invites us to look beyond the difficulties of the present moment and to trust in God's greater plan. And it is in this context that the next point arises, the judgment on the wicked nations, showing the perfect balance between justice and divine vengeance. Judgment on the ungodly nations. Isaiah 34:1-17. Isaiah begins this chapter with a universal summons, "Draw near, O nations, to hear. Listen, O peoples." Isaiah 34:1. It is a call that cannot be ignored as it deals with God's judgment on the ungodly nations. The prophet does not speak only to the Israel of his time, but to all nations, emphasizing that no one is beyond the reach of divine judgment. It is like thunder that echoes through the world, warning that justice will be established. Here, God's glory is manifested in its entirety, bringing judgment and vengeance against those who have rebelled against him. The text follows with intense and vivid descriptions of God's wrath. The sword of the Lord is drunk with blood. Isaiah 34:6. These images may seem shocking, but they reflect the seriousness of divine judgment. It is a direct response to the continuing rebellion of nations that have strayed from justice and righteousness. Imagine a ruler who sees his people suffer because of corrupt leaders and decides to intervene. The Lord's vengeance is not driven by uncontrolled anger, but by the need to restore order and justice. Edom, in this context, is used as a symbol of ungodly nations. Edom will be turned into fiery pitch. It shall not be quenched day or night. Isaiah 34:9-10. This description points to the utter desolation that befalls those who oppose God's will. It is like a city devastated by war, where the desert takes the place of the former glory. In practical terms, it reminds us of the inevitable consequences of choices that reject God's justice and spirit. Isaiah's vision continues, describing a place inhabited by wild animals and strange creatures. Owls and hedgehogs shall dwell there. Isaiah 34:11. This symbolizes total destruction, where what was once inhabited by men now becomes the domain of nature. This image is not only a scene of devastation, but also a reminder that God is sovereign over everything. He can reverse human glory into ruins, and likewise restore the desert to flourish. It is a lesson in humility and trust in divine providence. Isaiah reinforces that this judgment is the day of the Lord's vengeance, a year of retribution for Zion's sake. Isaiah 34:8. Here, the word revenge carries a different weight from human usage. It is divine justice being fulfilled. God does not forget the oppression of his people or the promises made to them. Think about how this truth can bring comfort. Even when it seems that the injustices of this world remain unpunished, Isaiah assures us that God is attentive and will act at the right time. The prophet also reminds us that the word of God is irrevocable. None of these things will be wanting, for the mouth of the Lord hath commanded, and his spirit will gather them together. Isaiah 34:16. This phrase reinforces that everything God has promised will be fulfilled, whether in judgment or restoration. This invites us to reflect. To what extent do we trust in divine sovereignty? Do we live with the assurance that God will fulfill his justice, even if we don't see it immediately? Isaiah highlights the contrast between the spiritual wilderness that results from rebellion and the renewal that God can bring. As ungodly nations face destruction, God's people are called to look to the future with hope. This duality reminds us that judgment and restoration are two sides of the same coin. Just as a farmer clears the field for a new crop, God removes what is corrupt to bring glory and renewal. The chapter ends with a vision of total abandonment to the ungodly nations. Their stones will fall one after another, and their valleys will be like burnt brimstone. Isaiah 34:9-10. These images are not only symbolic, but a reminder of God's absolute power over all things. When we trust in divine justice, we understand that even in the midst of chaos, there is a greater purpose being fulfilled. This section is an invitation to introspection. We are called to evaluate which side we are on, that of rebellion that leads to the spiritual desert, or that of submission that results in renewal and glory. Divine judgment is not an end in itself, but a step toward restoration. And it is in this restoration that Isaiah opens the way to the next chapter, where the wilderness will blossom and joy will become eternal. Glory and divine restoration. Isaiah 35:1-10. Isaiah begins with a startling image. The wilderness and the dry land will rejoice. The wilderness shall rejoice and blossom like a daffodil. Isaiah 35:1. Here, the prophet invites us to imagine the impossible, a desert, a symbol of aridity and desolation, overflowing with life and beauty. This transformation is not only physical, but profoundly spiritual. It is a picture of the glory of God restoring what once seemed lost. Who has never felt in an emotional desert, without strength, and seen a small flower emerge as a sign of hope? This is exactly what Isaiah describes, a divine intervention that changes everything. The transformation of the wilderness is accompanied by the manifestation of God's glory. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the brightness of our God, Isaiah 35:2. This glory is not something distant or abstract. It is palpable and visible, bringing renewal and judgment. Think about times when God's presence seemed clear in your life, whether it was an answered prayer or a word that came at the right time. This is the glory that Isaiah promises, a renewal that transforms the desert of the soul into an orchard full of fruit. The prophet not only describes the scenario, but also encourages, "Strengthen your feeble hands, make firm your feeble knees," Isaiah 35:3. This is a direct call to those who feel weak or discouraged. Isaiah reminds us that God's glory and restoration are not just to observe, but to participate in. When we face challenges, strengthening our hands and steadying our knees can mean seeking help in prayer, encouraging others, or simply stepping out in faith, even when the path seems uncertain. This promise is accompanied by an even greater assurance. Say to those who are discouraged in heart, "Be strong, do not be afraid, your God will come to save you." Isaiah 35:4. It is a word of comfort for those who are in the midst of the struggle, assuring that divine justice will not be delayed. Imagine hearing this in a moment of despair, the certainty that God is on the way, ready to intervene. In our practical life, this can mean waiting in faith, even when the signs are not visible, knowing that restoration is on the horizon. Isaiah goes on to describe miracles that accompany God's glory. "The eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be made unopened," Isaiah 35:5. These signs are not only physical, but also spiritual. They represent the awakening of a new understanding and a new sensitivity to God's will. Think of times when something seemed difficult to comprehend, but suddenly it became clear as daylight. This is what God promises, to open our eyes and ears to see His truth and glory. The desert, once inhospitable, becomes a place of joy and celebration. "Waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and rivers in the wilderness," Isaiah 35:6. This image of flowing waters is a powerful symbol of the life that God brings. In a world where scarcity seems to dominate, God offers abundance. In our lives, this can mean finding strength and purpose in the midst of difficulty, as unexpected sources that sustain us in the wilderness. Isaiah also talks about a special way. There will be a way that will be called the Holy Way, Isaiah 35:8. This path is reserved for the redeemed, those who have chosen to follow God's righteousness and judgment. It is safe, without the threat of dangers or deceptions. Imagine a well-marked trail in the middle of a dense forest. It is this kind of clarity and reassurance that God offers to those who walk in His light. At the end, the prophet describes a glorious final destination. "Those redeemed of the Lord shall return, and shall enter Zion with joy. Everlasting joy shall crown their heads." Isaiah 35:10. This is the culmination of divine restoration, a place where sorrow and suffering are no more, replaced by eternal joy. This promise is a reminder that while we face difficulties now, God's ultimate plan is one of complete restoration. Divine glory and restoration are not just promises for the future. They begin now, in our lives. Isaiah invites us to trust, even when the desert seems immense and endless. And in speaking about this restoration, he paves the way for the next part of his vision, a deeper look at God's role in judging and redeeming the nations. Isaiah combines two seemingly contrasting messages, judgment and redemption. The judgment of ungodly nations, such as Edom in Isaiah 34, is placed side by side with the restoration described in Isaiah 35. This reflects the perfect balance of divine justice, where judgment and mercy coexist. God, as the supreme king, exercises justice over those who persist in rebellion, while offering redemption and glory to those who seek his face. Imagine a ruler who punishes the corrupt but reaches out to the repentant, inviting them to participate in a new kingdom. This is the picture Isaiah presents to us. The prophet leaves no room for doubt. God is in absolute control of the destiny of nations. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the causes of Zion. Isaiah 34:8. This day is not only a time of destruction, but an affirmation of divine sovereignty. God judges justly, not impulsively. In our lives, this reminds us that the apparent injustices of the world do not escape the divine gaze. Everything will be resolved in due time, according to God's greater purposes. At the same time, Isaiah presents an image of redemption that contrasts with the gloomy scenario of judgment. The wilderness and the dry land shall rejoice, Isaiah 35:1. While some nations face desolation, others are invited to experience restoration. This shows us that judgment is not the end, it is the beginning of something new. Just as a field must be plowed before it can be sown, divine judgment prepares the ground for renewal. Think of times of crisis that have led to growth in your own life. This is the dynamic of God's justice. Isaiah points out that redemption is accompanied by the manifestation of divine glory. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the brightness of our God. Isaiah 35:2. This splendor is not only to be admired, but to transform hearts and nations. Restoration is not limited to an external change. It renews the spirit and brings new understanding. How many times in our lives do we see seemingly hopeless situations that by God's grace become testimonies of his glory and power? God's role as judge and redeemer also reflects his relationship with the nations. He does not act with partiality, but with justice. Righteousness shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness shall live in the orchard. Isaiah 32:16. This righteousness is the foundation of the kingdom of God, where no nation or individual is above the divine law. However, God is not only just, he is also merciful, offering redemption even to those who have fallen away. It challenges us to look at our own lives and ask, are we responding to God's call to live in righteousness and spirit? Isaiah presents the holy way as a symbol of redemption. There will be a road, a way that will be called the holy way. Isaiah 35:8. This path is not just a route for the redeemed people, it is a spiritual journey that requires commitment and transformation. To follow this path, we need to leave behind the practices that lead to rebellion and embrace God's glory and judgment. Think of the holy way as a well-marked road that leads us to eternal peace, but requires us to leave unnecessary baggage. While some nations face desolation, others experience abundance. Waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and rivers in the wilderness. Isaiah 35:6. This image of waters flowing in the desert symbolizes God's grace, turning the impossible into reality. Likewise, in our lives, divine grace can bring renewal, even in the most arid moments. What seemed dead can flourish when God intervenes. How can we allow this grace to flow into our lives? Maybe it's through prayer, searching for his word, or small steps of faith. Isaiah also reminds us that judgment is a reflection of God's character. He rejoices not in destruction, but in the restoration of order and justice. What he desires is to see the nations recognizing his glory and walking uprightly. In our practical life, this may mean abandoning behaviors or attitudes that lead us away from God and seeking to live according to his commandments. Divine justice is not punitive, but corrective, always seeking to bring renewal. Finally, Isaiah ends with a vision of eternal joy. Those who are redeemed of the Lord shall return and shall enter Zion with joy. Isaiah 35:10. This promise gives us insight into the ultimate destiny of the redeemed people, a place where sorrow and pain are no more. Judgment prepares the way for that eternal joy by showing that God is faithful to his promises. This message encourages us to trust in God even in times of difficulty, knowing that his justice and redemption are certain. This section leaves us with an important reflection. Are we ready to live as part of this kingdom of righteousness and glory? Isaiah invites us to consider our choices and to walk in the holy way that God has prepared. From here, the text delves into the relationship between God's judgment and his ultimate purpose for the world. Do you notice how Isaiah offers us more than just a distant prophecy? He gives us an invitation to live a life filled with purpose, justice, and renewal. But the question that remains is, what will you do with all this? Are you prepared to walk on the holy way, to live according to a kingdom of righteousness where even the desert blooms? Or will it continue to rely on structures that, in the end, collapse like sandcastles? Transformation begins in simple but decisive steps. You can get started today. Where are the arid areas of your life that need restoration? Is it in your family, in your work, or even in your connection with God? Imagine the impact of a conscious decision to align your life with the divine plan. It would be like seeing a desert bloom before your eyes. Now a provocation. What would it be like to live without fear of judgment because you are fully sure of your redemption? And what would it be like to witness God's glory not only in the future, but in your present? Think about it. Maybe it's time to take the first step and let God transform your journey. And if you want to continue learning and diving deeper into these truths, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. We're just getting started, and there's so much more to discover about God's grand plan for the world and for you.